The history of humanity is a chronicle of triumph and tragedy, but few forces have shaped the course of civilization as profoundly as disease. From the ancient empires of Rome to the bustling cities of the 21st century, pandemics and epidemics have acted as both destroyers and creators, leveling societies while paving the way for new orders. This is the story of how invisible killers, tiny microbes that can neither be seen nor felt, altered the destinies of nations and the fate of humankind. 1. The Plague of Justinian. The fall of an empire. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, was at its zenith in the 6th century under the reign of Emperor Justinian I. With its capital in Constantinople, the empire was a beacon of culture, wealth, and military power. But in 541 AD, something sinister arrived in the empire's bustling ports, carried by rats and fleas, a disease that would come to be known as the Plague of Justinian. This was no ordinary illness, it was Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for bubonic plague. It struck with horrifying speed, causing fever, delirium, and the infamous buboes, painful, swollen lymph nodes that turned black with blood. In the crowded streets of Constantinople, the plague spread like wildfire, decimating the population. At its peak, it was said to claim 5,000 lives a day, leaving the empire's capital a ghost town of corpses. The plague's impact was devastating, bringing the empire to its knees. Justinian's grand ambitions to reunite the Roman Empire under his rule were dashed as the military and economy crumbled under the weight of the disease. The Byzantine Empire never fully recovered, and the plague's aftermath set the stage for the rise of Islam, which would soon sweep across the weakened Mediterranean world, forever altering the course of history. 2. The Black Death. The Grim Reaper of the Middle Ages. 8 centuries after the Plague of Justinian, the spectre of Yersinia pestis returned with a vengeance in what would become known as the Black Death. It began in 1347 when Genoese trading ships docked in Sicily, carrying a deadly cargo. Within days, the island was engulfed in the horror of a plague that would go on to kill an estimated 75 to 200 million people across Europe, Asia, and Africa. The Black Death was merciless. It struck indiscriminately, kings and peasants alike fell victim to its deadly grip. Cities were decimated, with some losing half their populations. The stench of death filled the air, and mass graves were dug to accommodate the overwhelming number of bodies. The social fabric of Europe unraveled as fear and superstition took hold. Jews, accused of poisoning wells, were persecuted, while flagellants roamed the streets, whipping themselves in a futile attempt to appease a wrathful god. But amid the horror, the Black Death also brought about profound changes. The drastic reduction in population led to labor shortages, which in turn gave rise to better wages and living conditions for the surviving peasantry. The feudal system, which had dominated Europe for centuries, began to crumble, paving the way for the Renaissance, a rebirth of art, culture, and science that would transform the continent. 3. Smallpox. The conquistador's silent weapon. When Christopher Columbus set sail in 1492, he unwittingly carried with him more than just a spirit of exploration. He brought disease to the New World. Among the most devastating of these was smallpox, a highly contagious virus that had long been a scourge in Europe but was entirely unknown to the indigenous peoples of the Americas. The arrival of smallpox in the Americas was nothing short of cataclysmic. The indigenous populations, with no immunity to the virus, were decimated. The disease spread rapidly, wiping out entire communities and weakening the great civilizations of the Aztecs and the Incas. Smallpox, more than the swords and guns of the conquistadors, was responsible for the fall of these mighty empires. In the wake of smallpox, the Spanish and Portuguese empires were able to conquer vast territories with relative ease. The once thriving cultures of the Americas were reduced to fragments, their histories largely erased by the ravages of disease. The legacy of smallpox in the New World is one of unparalleled destruction, but it also laid the foundation for the modern global order, as European powers established colonies across the continent. 4. The Spanish flu, the forgotten pandemic. As World War I drew to a close in 1918, the world was struck by an enemy far deadlier than any battlefield. The Spanish flu, a virulent strain of influenza, swept across the globe, infecting an estimated one-third of the world's population and killing between 50 and 100 million people, more than the war itself. The Spanish flu was a silent killer, striking down the young and healthy with shocking speed. Victims would often die within hours of showing symptoms, their lungs filling with fluid until they suffocated. Hospitals were overwhelmed, and makeshift morgues were set up to handle the influx of bodies. The virus spread rapidly in the crowded conditions of military camps and troop ships, but no corner of the world was spared. Despite its staggering death toll, the Spanish flu has often been overshadowed by the war that preceded it. However, its impact was profound. The pandemic hastened the end of the war and influenced the Treaty of Versailles, as the virus weakened armies and governments alike. It also spurred advancements in public health and epidemiology, as scientists scrambled to understand the virus and prevent future pandemics. 5. HIV/AIDS, the modern plague. In the early 1980s, a new and terrifying disease began to emerge, primarily among gay men and intravenous drug users. At first, it was a mystery, an illness that destroyed the immune system, leaving its victims vulnerable to a host of infections and cancers. This disease would come to be known as HIV/AIDS, and it would go on to claim the lives of more than 32 million people worldwide. The early years of the HIV/AIDS epidemic were marked by fear, stigma, and ignorance. Infected individuals were often shunned, and many governments were slow to respond, allowing the virus to spread unchecked. It wasn't until the late 1980s and early 1990s that the true scale of the epidemic became apparent, as the death toll skyrocketed and entire communities were devastated. HIV/AIDS has had a profound impact on global society. It has reshaped sexual behavior, led to advancements in medicine, and sparked a worldwide movement for human rights and equality. The epidemic also highlighted deep social inequalities, as marginalized communities bore the brunt of the disease. While modern treatments have transformed HIV from a death sentence into a manageable chronic condition, the scars of the epidemic remain. 6. COVID-19, the pandemic of our time. In late 2019, a new virus emerged in the city of Wuhan, China. What began as a cluster of pneumonia cases soon spread across the globe, bringing the world to a standstill. COVID-19, caused by the novel coronavirus SARS-CoV-2, would become the defining crisis of the 21st century, infecting millions and claiming millions of lives. The COVID-19 pandemic was unlike anything the modern world had seen. Entire countries went into lockdown as governments scrambled to contain the virus. Hospitals were overwhelmed, economies were shattered, and life as we knew it changed overnight. The pandemic exposed deep flaws in global health systems, political leadership, and social structures, leading to widespread fear, uncertainty, and division. But the pandemic also sparked an unprecedented global response. Scientists raced to develop vaccines at record speed, and new technologies like mRNA vaccines became a beacon of hope. Communities came together to support one another, and the pandemic highlighted the importance of global cooperation in the face of a shared threat. As the world continues to grapple with the long-term effects of COVID-19, its impact on history is still unfolding. The pandemic has accelerated trends like remote work, digital transformation, and geopolitical shifts, and it has forced humanity to confront the fragility of our interconnected world. The invisible architects of history. Throughout history, diseases have been the invisible architects of change, shaping the rise and fall of empires, altering the course of wars, and transforming societies in ways both profound and unexpected. These tiny organisms, often dismissed as mere nuisances, have proven time and again that they hold the power to alter the fate of humanity. As we look back on the diseases that have changed the world, we are reminded of the delicate balance between life and death, the thin line between order and chaos. Each pandemic has left its mark, a reminder that despite all our advancements, we remain at the mercy of nature's smallest creations. And as new diseases emerge, we must continue to learn from the past, preparing for the challenges that lie ahead in a world where the next great pandemic is always just a mutation away.